So good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar organized by the Icon Ceramics and Glass Group. I am Miriam Orsini. I'm the Nigel William Prize Coordinator on the committee, and I will be moderating tonight's talk. Like everyone who has joined us tonight, I'm sure, I was horrified by the news of the explosion which took place on the evening of the 4th of August 2020 at the port of Beirut, which, as you know, was caused by a massive stockpile explosion of ammonium nitrate, which, as you know, resulted in the death of many people and the displacement of many people, and has inflicted a lasting trauma on the people of Beirut. The city shook under the blast, and many buildings surrounding the area were heavily damaged. And one of these buildings was the Archaeological Museum at the American University of Beirut, where a display case of 74 archaeological glass vessels was destroyed. I am very pleased tonight to be joined by Dr. Duygu Çamurcuoğlu, Senior Ceramics, Glass and Metals Conservator at the British Museum, and by Object Conservator Claire Cuyaubère, I really hope I pronounced those well, who in their respective roles as lead conservator and project conservator were responsible for the conservation of 8 of those shattered vessels in what became to be known as the Beirut Glass Project. This was a collaboration between the British Museum and the American University of Beirut, and the conservation work lasted 3 months and culminated in the exhibition Shattered Glass of Beirut, which took place between August and October at the British Museum, which I hope many of you got to see. Duygu and Claire have given many talks to small and big audiences since the end of the project, and they have talked about the various aspects of the project itself. But tonight they're delighting us with all the details of the actual conservation work, which has returned to the American University of Beirut and the people of Beirut a piece of their history, as well as the new stories which have emerged as a result of the conservation and research project. So please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box during the talk. This will be answered by Claire and Duygu at the end. And now, without further ado, I will hand over to Duygu and Claire. Enjoy the talk.
So thank you all for attending, and we're very happy to share in more details about this exciting project. So our talk today will present the aftermath of the major explosion that occurred at the port of Beirut on August 4, 2020. So as you can see probably on the screen, the damage, the explosion caused over 200 deaths and thousands of injured and displaced, and major damage to the city. And at the American University of Beirut, or AUB, the Archaeological Museum, which you can see on the left, and was founded in 1868, is located about 2 miles from the warehouse that ignited and exploded. So all windows and the main door were blown by the blast. Broken glass was scattered through exhibition spaces. So all objects on display and in storage came out unscathed, fortunately, but except for one showcase that detached from its wall and fell face down onto the marble floor. So that case used to display 74 glass objects dating from Roman, Byzantine, and Islamic periods, such as vases, bottles, bowls, plates, and a mosque lamp. And as you can probably see or guess, almost all of them showed some level of iridescence and weathering. And the wall painting that you can see on the right is a photograph, so that wasn't an issue for us. And this is the case after the explosion. Curator Dr. Nadine Panayot took the wise decision to leave the toppled case in situ until a trained conservator could intervene, because Lebanon doesn't have a conservation training program and only a couple trained conservators. So the French National Institute for Cultural Heritage, or INP, put together an emergency operation and received funding from ALIF, which is the International Alliance for the Protection of Heritage in Conflict Areas. And so a month after the explosion, I flew to Beirut with supplies for the recovery of the fragments. And while windows were being replaced and broken window glass was swept from the galleries, the toppled case had been left in place until then, and it was lifted just before I arrived at the museum by museum staff under the supervision of the museum director and engineer. And this is what the damage looked like. So broken glass vessels and shards mixed up with broken modern glass from the vitrine and from the heavy glass shelves. So I divided the floor, the gallery floor, according to a grid, so that the fragments would be systematically collected area by area, up to the tiniest ones, before moving on to the next area, rather than jumping to the last fragments that we could recognize already from the before blast photographs. And this was very tempting, obviously. I also set a few rules for everyone helping on the recovery, since most of them had an archaeological background, but none of them were really trained in preventive conservation or art handling best practices. So these rules will seem very basic to you. So handling of the fragments was reduced as much as possible, and handling the boxes was preferred. Nitrile gloves had to be worn at all times to handle shards rather than cotton gloves or bare hands, especially since we were all sweating a lot in the very hot and humid weather. And objects and fragments were to be kept in conservation grade boxes lined with plastisol foam to prevent them from moving and rolling around in the box. And they should be placed in the box in a single layer and spaced out as much as possible. So the following method was developed for picking the fragments off the floor and separating them into different boxes. First, when fragments could be recognized on the floor as being part of the same vessel, so using the glass color, the shard's curvature and thickness, the surface appearance and condition, as well as the type of degradation and iridescence, they were collected and placed together in a box. And these single object boxes were marked with the object's inventory number as soon as the fragments could be matched with an object in the database. Second, when fragments were mixed up and difficult to sort out or recognize, they were placed together in a box to prevent the loss of any information about their location on the gallery floor. And the area boxes created this way were identified according to the fragment's location. And they were meant to serve as a stock of shards from which to look for fragments matching other objects. And finally, the single object boxes were also marked with the location of the fragments on the floor. And this would help find missing shards in nearby area boxes later. So recovery was done as teamwork with the museum director, museum staff, and several volunteers, most of them archaeologists and archaeology students. And while shards were being picked up from the floor, the fragments were identified by comparing them with the AUB Archaeological Museum database, collection database. Identification was done mostly by the museum's research assistants, who trained as archaeologists and know the collections well. I also consolidated the most unstable fragments that showed either iridescent and lifting layers or hairline cracks. Both surface and structural conditions were done using dilute B72 in a mix of acetone and ethanol. But due to the limited amount of time, only a fraction of the most unstable fragments was consolidated then. And you can see part of the team at work here. So each working on a different area of the grid. And at the end of the fourth and last day of the recovery operation, we had been able to pick up all of the shards from the floor and to identify fragments from almost all 74 objects that were in the toppled case. 2 glass vessels had been found whole and unbroken, which was both a surprise and a relief. And a quick overall condition assessment of the fragments was done, and about 15 objects were identified as a priority for future conservation treatments. Less than a year later, in 2021, INP and ALIF put together a second operation that lasted 2 months with the help of a fourth-year student in conservation from INP, Cécile Rodier, which you can see on the left of the picture. I started assessing the condition of the different object boxes, while 4 archaeology students from the AUB worked on sorting the fragments from the area boxes. And we were able to do some advanced puzzle work after consolidating unstable fragments and to reconstruct 12 vessels. Then a third short conservation project in Beirut took place early this year as Stephen Koob, so Chief Conservator Emeritus at the Corning Museum of Glass, volunteered his time and expertise to help with the project. So in just a few days, and thanks to all the sorting and puzzle work that was done during the previous conservation campaign, the 2 of us were able to reconstruct an additional half a dozen vessels. We also led a workshop about archaeological glass and glass degradation for archaeologists and archaeology students from Beirut, with a hands-on component that consisted in trying and reconstructing broken modern glasses that we had mixed up. So the idea was to mimic the sorting and reconstruction work, but obviously we couldn't have non-conservators practice on the archaeological artifacts. And then before I let Duygu take over and talk about the collaboration with the British Museum, I'll just say that as soon as that collaboration was formalized in summer 2021, so during the second conservation campaign, my intern and myself worked on selecting 8 vessels for conservation treatment at the British Museum and packing them. So criteria for selecting the objects, which you will see in the next slide, were the fragments' surface and structural stability, so that they could travel safely to London and back, and the vessel's completeness. So it had to be worth it treating them in London away from the rest of the fragments. And after some advanced puzzle work to find as many fragments as possible that belonged to these vessels, we individually packed the fragments for travel, and this is what you can see on the photographs. And now this is for Duygu.
Thank you very much, Claire. This was a great summary of work took place in Beirut at the AUB Museum right after the disaster. After giving many talks together or separately, I just want to actually say a massive thanks to Claire here for, as a conservator, what she achieved in Beirut during the recovery process. As we know, as conservators, for most of us, when we see a scene like that, it's kind of shocking. And it is not always very easy to keep calm and be organized, and not only for yourself, but your team as well. So on behalf of everyone in the Beirut Glass Project, people, conservators, archaeologists, curators worked in Beirut, and also at the British Museum, I would like to say a massive thanks to Claire. Because if Claire didn't go there and she did not achieve this work, none of this would be able to be achieved. The project wouldn't happen. So big thanks. Now I will continue with the Beirut Glass Project at the British Museum. So while Claire actually she was in Beirut, and the French National Institute of Cultural Heritage were kind of organizing everything with ALIF, our team, curatorial team at the British Museum, with the direction of the museum director, Dr. Hartwig Fischer, immediately connected with the AUB Museum following the explosion. And the BM asked AUB Museum how can we actually help them? How can we support them? What can we offer? Because our curatorial team already did a huge research about what exactly happened in Beirut, what heritage institutions got damaged, but it looked like AUB was one of the institutions with no conservation resources and conservation team. And so that Dr. Nadim Panayot, the head curator and the director of the museum, asked conservation support from the British Museum too. Of course, during that time, it was 2020, and as the British Museum staff, most of us were on furlough, which is a term we all learned during the pandemic, meant that we were at work, we were not allowed to work, actually. But because of the emergency of the situation, I was sent some images from these possible objects that they may be sent to British Museum for further conservation work. So in London, I was the first person to look at these 8 vessels that Claire packed, did the recovery and packed them. And I had to come up with time estimates for the full conservation of these 8 objects. And most of you may know that this is one of the most difficult things to do, because as conservators, we actually don't like doing this because we don't see the objects in front of us, we can't touch them, we can't see their surfaces properly. But of course, because this was a very different situation, I immediately, started looking at the images and started thinking about my own personal experiences with archaeological glass. And also thinking that, because as a team, we decided that we needed a kind of an experienced glass conservator, really, to carry out this work. So I kind of thought, okay, if I was given these objects and if I sat down and worked on these objects, how much time I would spend, plus and minus. Obviously, I wasn't really familiar with these objects. So I did my best to come up with about 300 hours. 300 hours to do a complete conservation work on these objects. And as Claire knows, some of our work consisted of some additional puzzle work, basically cleaning and consolidation of surfaces, reconstruction work, and only if necessary, because as the team, we decided that we only wanted to do support fills for areas that required, but not aesthetical fills. And obviously any type of archaeological study or discussions or removal of, surface deposits, modern deposits, or anything that needs to be discussed with the curator itself. So, and then after that, what happened is I got back to work, and then I was told that because this also, as time estimation, was going to be used for the British Museum to apply for a funding from TFAF, European Fine Art Foundation. And therefore, it was very important that we kind of created all this information to support the funding application. And big thanks to TFAF, the Museum Restoration Fund gave us support. This is how Claire also packed all these objects with really good packing materials. And then the objects were transported to the UK, to London in December 2021 with Constantine art shippers. And I was there at the British Museum to actually welcome the vessels to the museum in December, last December. So today, today is what? Today is the 19th. So 3 days ago, the 16th of December, was the first year of the vessels actually arriving to the British Museum. Our project, we actually put here on our slide, our project aims like full conservation of the vessels, study and analysis of the vessels, and the short-term display at the British Museum at the end of the project. And on top of that, we aimed to work with a Lebanese colleague from the AUB Museum, who happened to be a museum assistant and with an archaeology background. And we supported her with the conservation, collections care, best practices, and how to set up a basic conservation studio. Can we move, Claire? So as you can see here, December 2021, the objects arrived, thanks to Claire, in 6 boxes. Yes, there are 8 vessels, but they did an amazing job by actually creating levels in the boxes. So in some cases, 2 objects would be fitted in one box. And you can also see these small Ziploc bags, plastic bags, and they used these soft foam, and there were lots of small and medium-sized fragments in these plastic bags, and there were loads of them, and they were also in an organized way. They were fitted in the plastic foam cutouts and in the boxes. Claire, do you want to add anything about this part?
Just to say that we basically had like individual, like bespoke cutout shapes for the larger and most curviest fragments, but all the ones that were smaller or kind of flat were in the Ziploc bags for room sake.
So once I received the objects, of course, I immediately opened the boxes, and I had a kind of quick condition assessment of all the fragments, just to make sure that there are no further damage happened during the transport, because I also knew that once Claire started, well, at that time we didn't know it was going to be Claire, but when the project conservator started the post, she would carry out a more detailed condition assessment also. So following the arrival of the objects, we immediately started working on to put out contract post for the Beirut Glass Conservation Project for 3 months. And a successful conservator would be responsible from day-to-day, full-time conservation of these 8 glass vessels at the BM. Via a recruitment process, BM recruitment process, we chose Claire as a successful candidate. And of course, we were also happy that Claire joined our project because she was also the link between Beirut, AUB Museum, and us. She had a lot of experience and familiarity with these objects and the type of glass itself. So Claire started her post end of March 2022. Shall we move on? And as you can see, this is the team. We also had our colleague Loretta Hogan, Senior Ceramics and Glass Conservator, as a support to the team. Do you see where Claire works in our large archaeological processing room? It's the World Conservation Exhibition Center at the British Museum. And we were really happy to have this space because it's a massive space. And you can see Claire actually spreading over all the fragments, all the objects, working on, at individual kind of stations for individual objects. And there were a lot of space for us to move about. And you can see on the picture here on the kind of right, our Lebanese colleague and project intern, Eme Burisk. She helped us a lot with documentation, and the recording of the glass objects and the material and the fragments. She did a lot of kind of background contextual research on the objects, on the vessels, also communicated with the curators at the British Museum. And also she supported us with scientific research and supported Claire with some of the conservation work and puzzle work. Claire, do you want to add anything? No, not here. Okay, we can move. We can move.
Working on that.
Yeah. Okay, so the project, I want to talk about here how we started organizing the vessels and the conservation work on the vessels. So first of all, me and Claire, I just want to mention about my responsibility in this project. So I became the lead conservator, who is basically managing and organizing the conservation work in general, supporting Claire at all things conservation and other logistics within the project, dealing with all the kind of other stakeholders such as the filming teams, curatorial team, scientific team, all the outreach, the visits, development team in the museum, and all the kind of organizing talks, lectures, and other related outreach activities. So me and Claire and Aimé, as a team, every day we had a team brief, we can say. We actually planned what we would do, what we would achieve on the vessels, on the fragments each day and each week. And we would also discuss requests from other stakeholders, whether the filming team, whether they want to do, come and do a specific filming for the specific part of the conservation work, or we would have a visit that day, or scientists would want to come and look at fragments. So, and this was absolutely necessary because our schedule was very tight. We only had 3 months to finish the whole project, the 8 objects, but at the same time, we would make everyone happy, all, other stakeholders, so that we would have a kind of complete project successfully achieved within 3 months. So I was doing lots of kind of back and forth, emailing, communicating with people, at the same time supporting Claire. And at the same time, we agreed that by looking at the 8 objects in general, and with Claire's previous experiences, the vessels divided themselves actually naturally into 3 categories, and we named them category 1, 2, and 3. Category 1 objects would be very kind of simple conservation work, easy reconstructions, and maybe 1 or maybe none structural losses. Category 2 and 3, however, they were kind of more complicated conservation work, more, lots of fragments, complicated shapes, more structural losses, and yes, again, tricky reconstructions. And as you can see here, Claire doing some of the additional puzzle work, surface cleaning and consolidation work, and her starting with the construction processes. Dividing the vessels into 3 categories actually was very important and worked really well in the end. And it was good for our time management because once the category 1st objects were done, we were kind of not worried about them anymore. And the categories 2 and 3, the 3 objects, Claire worked on them simultaneously. So, and it worked really well in terms of project management and time management. Claire, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, just a few details about each step that we're showing here. For the additional puzzle work that was necessary, it sounds like I've been doing puzzle work for weeks, but it really was necessary, and it really helped finding the location of very tiny fragments. And so, for example, there were two larger objects, 2 plates. The one that's visible on the picture on the left actually has 145 fragments. So that was a lot of puzzle work. And I think for the largest object, which had 175 fragments, I counted my hours, and I think it totaled to about a week worth of puzzle work. So that was a long time, a long process. And then surface cleaning really was necessary as well, because the object had not received a proper surface cleaning in decades. And so, but it was a difficult or a delicate process, because often I had to do cleaning and consolidation at the same time to avoid losing some iridescent layers. And so for cleaning the surfaces, I mostly used cotton wool swabs that were just slightly damp with half ethanol, half deionized water, and then rinse with ethanol. And then consolidation was done with dilute B72 in acetone. And then for reconstruction, I used 48% weight by volume, sorry, paralloid B72 in acetone with a bit of fumed silica, and I used it in aluminum tubes, which is the method that Stephen Koob recommends in several of his publications, and that worked really well for these objects. Then this is about reconstruction, and I wanted to say that for some of them, as you can see, I was able to use magic Scotch tape for dry reconstruction and reconstruction itself, because a couple of the 8 vessels had relatively healthy surfaces, but for most of them that wasn't possible. So I had to use some small glass beads that you can see in the center of the slide, and I used them as a sandbox, but way less aggressive for the vessel's surfaces. Duygu, did you want to say something about
Yes. Yes, I just wanted to point out, I mean, actually, it was great that with Claire, Claire also introduced us during the project to, like different conservation materials, such as those mini beads. We ordered also as the BM team after Claire left, because I think it's very useful in terms of using as like a support when you're reconstructing either ceramics or glass objects. In terms of the paralloid B72, obviously we were kind of more leaning on using paralloid B72, obviously, because we are dealing with archaeological glass here. So for reconstruction, we did not even consider at all the use of epoxy resins. But at the same time, of course, we had to consider, how to make it up, since the objects will be traveling to Beirut, and since Beirut has a much hotter climate, and also the museum itself probably gets quite hot in the summer. So we also thought about this kind of things and discussed it between us, pros and cons of using B72, because I think Claire has also experienced by using B72, both Stephen Koob technique or just making up, her own, and I am the same. I also experienced different variations by using my own and HMG paralloid B72 and Stephen Koob's version. But I just wanted to mention here one of the interesting, in case you have not seen it yet, there is an article in the latest Studies in Conservation And I put here on the left corner the reference for this paper. It's about mixing B72 and B48N11 for use in hot climates. And the authors actually did some experimental work indicating that B48N, the addition of B48N into paraloid B72 would increase the glass temperature number of paraloid B72. So it's an interesting paper, and I would recommend everyone to read it, because if you're working on objects that either in hot climates or the objects need to travel back to hot climates, you know, it's an interesting point to think about. Okay, I think we can move on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the B72 that it wasn't my first idea. When I first went to Beirut and started working there, so the museum windows were being replaced again when I went back to Beirut in 2021 for some reason. So we had pretty much the hot weather entering the museum for a day while it was being replaced, and also the whole city was facing repeated power outages. So the temperature even in the storage area rose regularly to 27 degrees Celsius, and that worried me quite a bit. And at the time, I had decided to use paraloid B44, which also has a higher glass transition temperature at 60 degrees. And so the first set of vessels that we reconstructed in 2021 were reconstructed with B44. But then when I went back in January 2022, some of the power outage issues had been resolved. And also I was working with Stephen, who obviously convinced me that B72 was safe even at those temperatures. And it does make it much easier to readjust the alignment of the joints to use B72, since you can just like warm it up a little and just adjust the alignments much more easily than with B44. So that's another option too. But in the end, we felt relatively confident that B72 would be enough. With these objects.
Yes, glass transition temperature is definitely something to think about in these kind of situations in the countries, you know, countries that are more kind of, you know, they have hot summers, really hot summers, and maybe less equipment to cool the place down. Here, I just wanted to again add this slide here, just in case that everybody knows or everybody aware of, you know, our options out there. Obviously, as we said, paraloid B72, and there are other paraloids out there as well, which more people are doing studies. And both me and Claire also have been to the recent ICON-CC's recent advances in glass and ceramics conservation conference in Lisbon, and there were so many great papers there, and most of them they also looked at you know, these different materials from hextile to paraloids, from different grades of Japanese tissues and nanocellulose papers. You know, obviously all these materials are options out there for us, and as fill, mainly as fill materials, but they all have individual, again, kind of positive and negative sides. For us, we mainly focused on during the project, I mean, let's say not focused on, but thought about, mainly kind of discussed and thought about was the paraloid B72 and hextile NYL1. We did not consider any of the, you know, using different grades of Japanese tissue, or, you know, we haven't actually started doing any experimental work with the nanocellulose papers at the British Museum, but I really would like to. So we did lots of kind of thinking and experimenting with both Paralloid B72 and Hextal to see for the structural losses with which material we can get the best results. And should we check the next slide?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for Hextal, the difficulty was that due to the surface fragility of most of the vessels, I couldn't make silicone molds. I couldn't take the shape directly on the surfaces, so it had to be sheet cast fills in any case. And so we did try sheet casting for Hextal. So casting a sheet and then letting it partially cure and trying to shape it and cut it when it was still flexible but not sticky anymore, and it just didn't do the job for us. I just found it very, very difficult to work with. So I'm sure it can work for other objects, but it was difficult to shape, especially when it was very curvy areas. And so that's how we decided to use B72. We much preferred its workability.
Claire, at the same time though, with Hextal, I think things could be easier, could be more controlled if we had longer time. Because if you have only 3 months and you have 8 objects maybe to make fills, considering how long it takes for Hextal sheets to, you know, just properly set, or so I think we would need longer than 3 months to calmly work on and play with Hextal. So in this particular case, obviously the Paralloid B72 came to rescue as usual. And here we put, again, basic preparation guidelines known by all of you, I'm sure. And Claire started, you know, again, we had to, Claire, we want to say more here because we had to do a lot of playing with Paralloid B72 sheets as well. Do you want to say something?
Sure. Yeah, so we cast some sheets of B72 according to Stephen Koob's and Astrid van Giffen's recipe, which they have published. And it worked really well for smaller, thinner fills. And then it got more difficult when we wanted to make thicker sheets. And we constantly got some bubbling. And so for that, we actually tweaked the recipe. I think Duygu came up with this idea of having instead of having only 20% of the volume of solvent acetone added in ethanol later, after the B72 pellets are dissolved. I think she dissolved stronger B72, like more concentrate, and then added more ethanol. So that made for a mix that took forever to cure, to be honest. I think the one successful sheet that we achieved took weeks to evaporate, but in the end it never bubbled up. And that was the only one that made it possible to fill the thicker, slightly thicker glass of the plate that you can see in the center of the slide. And we did use that trick that Stephen had mentioned of once the sheet is like somewhat evaporated but not like still way too sticky, to put it in an oven at a low temperature, so around 40 degrees, and then just let it slowly drying. It just accelerates the evaporation, but it doesn't cause bubbles, so it does work pretty well. So that works, but it does require a little more time, but that's what did the trick for us.
Yes, I mean, I think that Yes, I think again, if you have longer time in your projects, that might work. So you can risk it. That can work. But at the same time, I mean, I was certainly a bit braver, I think, just to kind of, you know, just to see what will happen if we do that. I mean, I think, yes, if you know, you can in some cases go up, you know, you can double up the amount of ethanol as well. But I think what we did was not, you know, was just right enough. It took time. But as soon as after the oven drying, as soon as the sheet was kind of handleable, but maybe not fully set, we could, you know, Claire could start handling it, drawing the shapes on it, cutting it. Yes, the sheet still needed to set 100%, but I think sheet also did that after it was attached to the object, because then we just left the objects on their own, and the fill itself also just got set in its own time. So I think all in all, within 3 months, you know, it kind of worked well, but creating kind of smoother fills, smoother B72 fills. Should we move on?
Yeah, just one more trick. Once you've peeled that sheet of B72 out of the silicone mold, you have to use it then, because if you put it back onto even the same silicone mold, it will create bubbles. Like, you can only, so unlike what I did on the photograph on the top right, I would not recommend peeling off the entire sheet and then cutting up a small fill. Like, if I was to do it again, I would cut just a small rectangle in that big sheet, but leave it on the silicone mold, because then once it has all bubbled up, then it looks pretty bad and you can't use it anymore. And then for those fills, you can always tint the mix before casting the sheet. But since I was working on objects of different color at the same time, it was easier to just lightly tint it with watercolors and acrylic paints after the fill was shaped and cut.
Also, we really, as the project team from the beginning, we definitely did not want to do restoration. Our main aim was to conserve these glass vessels, not restore. Therefore, even with the tinting, we made sure that it's just lightly tinted, and we're not trying to cover anything. We're not trying to hide anything. And on the contrary, the curator of these glass objects, Dr. Panayot, actually wanted all the scars, all the new breaks, new joints to be clearly seen, because she also wanted all the visitors, people who look at these glass objects, to actually observe and experience what these objects went through during the explosion. Now we want to show you a time lapse filmed by our AV team, audiovisual team at the BM. They filmed Claire working on this beautiful Roman, small Roman bowl. So you can see the whole reconstruction process, and you can see how Claire worked here, how organized and clean and systematically. You can see the tapes already. The area is clean. All her tools and solvents, everything around her. And with glass conservation, this is the only way to achieve successful results. I think you have to be very organized and clean at all times. There you go. So she did this for other 7 vessels. Now, whilst we were working very busily on the objects, on the vessels, at the same time we were collaborating with the scientific teams, well, both actually at the British Museum and also at the University College London Institute of Archaeology. So our glass specialists, Dr. Andrew Meek from the British Museum was actually working with us closely on this. And as you can see, as a team, we all discussed and chose the most suitable fragments from each vessel for obviously the study of the glass materials, any kind of study of the deposits, any deposits inside and outside of the vessels, any surface decoration, and one of the most important aims were the provenancing and dating of these vessels. At the British Museum, our team used mainly portable X-ray fluorescence analysis and also scanning electron microscopy, EDS, and at the Institute of Archaeology, UCL, the team used laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. And as you can see here, member of the team at UCL actually placing the cassette with our samples, glass samples, in the LA ICPMS. This project was also tricky in terms of our time management because, as you may know, nothing ever goes smoothly, and the research processes took some time. And all the research, all the analysis had to be completed before we could start the reconstruction process. Because when some of the fragments are not there, Claire could not start. So we had to actually kind of do a bit of chasing with the scientific team, because we know that everybody is busy, but we try to kind of make sure to juggle the, you know, conservation and research work at the same time. And it all worked fine at the end. Should we move to the next slide? And here we like to show you this one example, very interesting object. It's object number 4536. And it's an Islamic bottle. It's one of the most interesting objects. First of all, when you look at it, what you see on it, its neck is a different color of glass and its body is a different color of glass. A lot of things were happening on the surface. There was that, you can see here, the black kind of deposit, which was quite fugitive. At the same time, if you look at the image, microscopic images on the left up corner, you can see there were some strange deposits inside the vessel. So obviously this vessel was one of the best examples to go through the research analytical process. And also there were lots of questions around the date and provenance of this vessel. So the scientific analysis show that first of all, the body of this glass object was made of plant ash composition, which was consistent with the production in the Islamic world. So its major and minor elements compositions associated with the plant ash and sand use in its production strongly suggested that this vessel was most probably produced in Syria and at a specific place called Raqqa. So which is quite amazing, because our scientific analysis actually pinpointed where the object was produced. When we look at the outside of the vessel, also some study and analysis on the glass materials show that the technique, this glass object was actually decorated with a technique called silver staining and the lustering techniques, particularly developed during the Islamic period in Egypt and Syria. You may know how the technique works, mixing of silver and copper pigments with possibly an organic binder, and then applying it over the surface of the glass, and then putting the object vessel in a kiln at a very, very low temperature. And the main aim here would be to create like here, quite like an ambery, yellow ochre surface. And once the object is out of the kiln, most possibly the organic binder they used to mix the pigments would disappear, leaving a black deposit, like a soot residues basically on the surface. And then this would be cleaned off and to reveal any kind of decoration. And here what you can see, that black soot, which was analyzed to be amorphous carbon, was still on the surface. That was one of the questions that we could not answer really, like why they left this soot still on the surface. Before I want to pass on to Claire quickly to make more comments on this object, also, if you look at the material inside this vessel, the analysis showed that this was a mixture of pieces of crushed pilot glass. And the majority of this material, it almost looked like salts as well, like blue, white. It was an interesting salty looking material. And our scientists told us that when you look at under analysis, they were more like opaque white, but other pieces were blue, green, and pink. And the high lead levels and the presence of arsenic, they detected arsenic, suggested that this material was not contemporary with the production of the vessel. So basically, it was most probably 19th century or later that this product would be added into this early Islamic vessel, which was dated to 7th to 9th century CE. Claire, do you want to say anything about?
Yeah, just to get back to the black deposit, we did consider the possibility that it was the burnt off organic binder from the luster decorating technique, but it didn't make sense because the object having been found whole meant that it was probably found in a funerary context. And it did have a defect, but it meant that it had been used still. So we thought it should have been cleaned before being used, no matter how imperfect. And it just didn't quite make sense. And we discussed it a lot back and forth also with the curator at the AUB Archaeological Museum, and decided that, we would sample the black deposit for future analysis and then clean it off, because that would also reveal the luster decoration, their silver staining decoration. So that's what I started doing with the shard that you see on the top left. So I started cleaning one shard, and it very clearly showed that the areas of black deposit matched areas, like variations in the luster technique. And this wasn't visible until I actually cleaned the fragment, because it was obscured on both sides with deposits. So when we saw that, we paused, we reassessed, and we ended up changing our mind on that treatment decision. And so I reconstructed the clean fragments with the rest of the fragments that I did not clean. In the end, we decided that it was preferable to keep the rest of the deposit as a witness to the manufacturing and decorating technique, and that there was still a little bit more to understand about this object, especially with that weird deposit on the interior and the fact that there was a manufacturing defect. So yes, we changed our mind halfway through. And then I just wanted to add a small tip it's common sense, but sometimes it's really useful when you want to adhere a fragment when you don't have access, either if it's very small or you don't have access to the interior of the vessel. If you stick the fragment to the tip of your bamboo skewer, that allows you to handle it and then just place it and join it with B72 as well, and then it's really easy to clean off the the B72 from the bamboo skewer and just detach it. So that was it can be useful for certain closed shapes. And then the results that Duygu did.
Ta-da! Ta-da! Yes.
That's it.
Yes. Yes, so this is as you saw, our objects are beautiful 8 glass objects after conservation. Claire achieved a very important thing, I think, as I said, within the 3 months. She, as we agreed from the beginning of the project, just sitting and working on the conservation of the glass vessels full time. Unfortunately, that didn't work because our filming team was constantly wanted to come and film several parts of the project and interview us, film us, because we wanted to make sure we create something for everyone, like our colleagues, you, and all the public, something, a project that they can feel related to the work we have done, explaining the nature of our conservation work, some of the techniques, and the nature of the objects, and so on. So we have been very busy juggling between the filming and the conservation work. So again, my big thanks goes to Claire at this point, because she managed between all this chaos to conserve these 8 objects very, very safely and systematically. Once the objects were conserved, and by the way, you can actually watch the film on British Museum's YouTube channel. Claire, first Emma left us beginning of June 2022. Her internship was finished, so she left us. And then Claire left us beginning of July after the completion of the conservation work. And then I was by myself, basically just organizing the mini display that we created at the British Museum. Of course, it was also quite a complicated job because we wanted to make sure that we create the best display for these beautiful objects. Also, we wanted to, for the first time, experience more interactive display in one of the galleries, small galleries at the British Museum. So therefore, as you can see, the image of the display, there was a massive curtain in the middle showing the effects of the explosion on 4th of August 2020. And on each side of this room, there were 2 screens. One screen would show arrival of Claire and the damage, how the curator and the museum team discovered the damage, and then the recovery process. And the other screen would be about the conservation work, Claire working on a vessel, close details, explaining the conservation work. This display, and also you can notice the lighting, big thanks to our exhibitions and lighting specialists. We came up with very, very good lighting for the glass objects, which is always, as you know, it's a challenge for displaying glass. This mini display held 43,000 people between 1.5 months, between end of August till the October, and 43,000 people visited it. At the same time, we had a lot of media interest from national and international parties, and lots of interviews, lots of kind of writing articles, producing visits or talks. So outreach-wise, it was a very busy project also. But we are all glad that the objects are now very safe, happy, and waiting to go back to Beirut in January. We're actually currently started packing the objects. our collections team creating these amazing boxes. Claire, if you see them, you'll love them. So I'm very, very happy and very proud of this project. We are coming to the end of the talk, aren't we?
We are. I just wanted to sum up what has been done since the explosion. So 18 vessels were reconstructed in Beirut, and then 8 at the British Museum. 2 had not been broken. So out of the 72 vessels that were broken in the explosion, 46 are still broken and in need of treatment, and we're applying for grants and funding and trying to get more conservation campaigns happening in Beirut. Duygu and I would like to thank everyone who made it possible, especially at the AUB Archaeological Museum, Dr. Panayot and Eme Burizek. And then obviously all our colleagues at the British Museum and all the support we got from TIFAF and other funders. And thank you for your attention, and would be happy to answer some questions.
Thank you very much for your attention, everyone.
Thank you both for this fantastic talk. Obviously an incredibly complex project in such a short time. And I'm personally really glad to hear that there's something going on in terms of trying to conserve the rest of the objects. And I really hope somebody will come forward. I'm sure there will be a lot of interest, and I think this project itself has generated a lot of interest, at least in this country. So hopefully there'll be a future for them. I just have a quick question before I jump into the audience's question. There's quite a few. I was wondering, so now that the objects go back, do you know what the situation is like at the museum at the moment? Do you think they'll be able to, I don't know, display the objects potentially? I imagine that's still quite a precarious situation.
Shall I go, Claire?
Sure.
Yes, Dr. Panayot definitely wants to display the objects. But I think firstly, the objects need to go back, and then they need to kind of have a proper plan, and they need to design a safer case for this time. And so there is some work need to be done. And for that, they may also need some extra resources, extra support. But the ultimate aim is to display whatever has been conserved so far. And then after that, hopefully there'll be more financial support or, you know, other resources to support the museum to actually continue with the remaining 46 objects.
Right. So actually, the vessels cannot go back to the same display case, to that same spot in the galleries, because the reason why it detached from the wall is because it's not a proper wall, but that was never indicated in the architectural plans. It's actually a former window that was filled up, and so that's why that area of the gallery is actually a weak point. So the objects would not go back to that area. So yes, a new organization in the galleries has to be decided.
Right, thank you both. So I'm going to go straight into the first question. Actually, it's a question that has been asked by several people. You generated a lot of interest. You talked about the mini beads for supporting glass and fragments. I would love to know more about these. Me too, actually.
Oh yeah, those are fantastic. I think they're actually made for the chemical industry. I think they're used for mixing up viscous liquids during it's for chemical labs, and they're pretty small. Yeah, it's useful to choose the 2 millimeter diameter ones, and then they're as useful as a sandbox, but they're not aggressive to the glass. Duygu, can you remember what the supplier was in the UK?
I can't, but I can actually look at it tomorrow and send it to the group.
But it must be like a chemical.
Yes, I mean we managed to find it in the UK, so we can find it. But I'll send the group the details of the supplier.
That's great, thank you. And actually related to that question, somebody asked, when rebuilding the large vessel, when you were using the glass bubble sand tank, how many shards were you able to bond at the same time?
I would usually bond them like 2 by 2 and then group the groups of 2. And then, so that's why I would have like multiple groups of fragments evaporating at the same time. I can just go back quickly to the image. So just, sorry, that's that larger plate on the top left. And you can see it here in the center of the slide. I have several that are where the joint is evaporating at the same time. And for the center, the bottom of that plate, I actually joined it well in advance to the sides of the plate, just to make sure that that part was strong enough that it could hold the weight of the rest of the vessel. For most of the other objects, I sort of joined them in one go, but for that one, it took several days of, letting the joints get stronger and also make some fills, structural fills, and reconstructing at the same time, which is, I think, what's happening there in the center. I needed that structural fill to add that last group of fragments.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Somebody asked, how did the cast sheet take the tinting material, and would you recommend one type of tinting over another?
I think what we did, which is either acrylic paint, but that's really for not very transparent glass. That works well. Then watercolors with acrylic medium works nicely for slightly clearer objects. But then if you have really transparent glass, then I would definitely recommend using dry pigments in the mix or dyes that you could mix in the B72. But for archaeological glass, that's like a little iridescent, a little, it's like not super clear, then watercolor and acrylic medium is very easy and it's very quick too, so that works well.
Right.
I mean, also these sheets were so thin at the same time, so it was kind of easy, wasn't it, Claire? It was easy to tint them. If you're dealing with obviously thicker fills, thicker sheets, or even epoxy sheets, some people feel like tinting them just by brush. It's quite tricky. I mean, I personally also work with that technique, and I usually use golden acrylic paints, as well as the golden acrylic glaze, actually glossy glaze. And I mix this, I use it on sheets, and it actually creates a really nice gloss, and you can obviously manage the level of tinting you want to create, and I find it way safer than actually mixing pigments with resins or with Perlite B72 and then actually creating your sheets. So I find direct painting on the sheets much easier and practical.
All right, thank you. And I guess still related to fields, how many attempts did you have at cutting those intricate shapes? Endless.
Many. I think for the jug that you can see on the top right, that was the most difficult vessel in terms of structural fills. because they're located around the shoulder and in the intricate rim. And so those were the most difficult. This is the point where I decided that Hextol wasn't going to do it, because I just couldn't get that curve right and the shape at the same time. And so and to be entirely transparent, I did the fills a first time and then left the object for about a week to 10 days on its own. And then when I came back for that one, it was slightly thicker glass. And so I had doubled up sheets of B72 together and sort of fused them together with just with a little bit of warmth from the hairdryer. And bubbles had actually formed within the two sheets of B72. And it just didn't look right because the glass is pretty clear on the top part of that object. And so I actually took the fills out and redid them. So for this one, a number of times. And then there were also so many trials with sheets that just were full of bubbles and that we couldn't use.
I imagine the time pressure was incredible, considering that you knew that you had 3 months. So I imagine, yeah, you didn't have a lot of time to test materials. You had to go straight into the actual conservation. Somebody's actually asking if you consider any other display method. I imagine this is referred to fields, digital, 3D. Yeah, I think it's referring to fields, but if it's not, if the person can just text further.
Yeah, I think, yeah, no, we actually didn't. We actually, I mean, first of all, if you are going into making 3D printed fills or going into 3D technologies, you have to have a lot of time to do a lot of experiments, a lot of investigation with the materials, the techniques, the technology itself, who will make it for you. And we just did not have that kind of time. As I said, 3 months. And believe me, 3 months is really nothing if you work on a number of glass objects. But at the same time, we believe that just traditional glass conservation methods would be completely fine and safe for these objects. So therefore, we did not, let's say, have enough reason to look into other kind of filmmaking techniques or display techniques.
And students at the AUB have actually experimented scanning the fragments, the broken fragments back in Beirut, and trying to use artificial intelligence to reconstruct virtually some of the vessels. And I mean, they're still in the learning process, but it's just not working well enough. Like, we can do so much better with our eyes and hands that it's not at the point where that technology is helpful. So maybe in the future when it's more advanced, I don't know. Also, another reason not to use 3D scanning on these objects is that glass is both transparent and glossy, and those two specificities make it very difficult to 3D scan the fragments. And so the students actually asked if we could cover the fragments in some powder that would make it matte, and the answer is no. Like, we cannot add whatever material that hasn't been conservation tested or detected or whatever. And the surface of the objects, it's just too fragile anyway. So for now, at least, the 3D technologies have not been useful. I know it's a big trend and it's been used in other materials like stone and ceramics, but I think for glass, it's just not doing the trick.
Great, thank you. Somebody's asking if you can please remind us of the percentage of B72 and mixture used in the reconstruction.
48% weight by volume.
Okay, great.
That's what's in Stephen Koob's like his several last publications. He has two recipes. One is thinner B72, and that's the one we used for glass. And one is a little thicker. I think it's 55% for ceramics.
That's great. And I guess you mentioned that already, both of you, but if you can clarify why epoxy wasn't considered, I imagine, as an adhesive. I imagine obviously the fact that they were archaeological had something to do with it, but if you can expand a little bit on it.
Yeah, I think the fragility of the surface, and then
Yeah.
the fact that there is a chance that we can find a few more fragments.
Yeah.
So it would just be too bad not to be able to safely take the fragments apart and add the new fragments or the newly found fragments later if that happens. And to be totally transparent, that already happened. When I worked in Beirut in January 2022, I was looking for a specific fragment for an object I was reconstructed, and I saw that other fragment, and I knew exactly to which object it belonged, and I had joined it like 7 months previously, and so I was glad it's joined with reversible adhesive and not epoxy.
Yeah, as a principle at the British Museum, we would not use epoxy resin for archaeological glass anyway. So
yeah,
this is the principle. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody's asking in relation to the scientific techniques that the analysis that you did. Is the silver stain technique, as far as you know, still used in glass production today in the region, or?
I think so, yes. I think it's still it's a technique, but I don't know, of course, how often it is being used. But when we see that those kind of ambery looking surfaces, I think yeah, that's an indication of luster technique. I mean, obviously the technique must have developed quite a bit through the early Islamic times, but yeah, it's a traditional technique. So.
And then later on, it became a thing in medieval.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So we've got 5 minutes left, so I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So somebody's saying, thank you for the detailed explanation of glass collection restoration. Can I ask what museum managers should be aware of when there are huge amounts of restored glass collections?
Well, we're talking about collection managers, right? So collection managers, first of all, they need to be aware of, we all need to be aware of working in the museum. The glass is a very fragile material. And handling is one of the most important points when dealing with glass. More than 90% of damage to museum collections happen via incorrect handling. So therefore, the collection managers, museum assistants, they need to familiar themselves with the glass collections, archaeological glass or modern glass, historical glass collections, and closely work with conservation teams to come up with certain guidelines, probably, protocols, in terms of what to do, what kind of processes to follow when handling, transporting, yes, like working with glass. And also they need to be able to, I think, given like basic conservation issues in related to glass collections, so that they are able to identify when they see something wrong, such as weeping glass, for example.
Yeah, and then the second criteria would be keeping the relative humidity between 40 and 50%, I would say, because that, like anything below or over, can cause some chemical degradation of the glass. But yeah, I would say handling is the first issue.
Great, thank you so much. And I'd like to conclude with this question. And then after this, somebody has asked if you could share any links to funding campaigns to support the project in Beirut. And thank you so much for sharing. So I guess if anyone, if Duygu or Claire could do that after the talk, perhaps. But the
so when you mean funding, funding campaigns in terms of
to support further work on the remaining glass in Beirut.
Okay, okay.
But the question I want to end with is, has the project given the British Museum a framework for working with more objects from disaster or conflict situations?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the museum already involved in various international collaborations, and always, as being an international museum, always trying to support museums that in need of resources or help in emergency times. But yes, this project definitely gave all of us a different insight into what to do, what not to do, how to start putting together a project, how to kind of progress when things happen unexpectedly. How can we be a help and still act, still practice in a very organized manner when things go very wrong? So yes, we also look back at the end of the project, what went wrong, what went really well, and we learned a lot from our, from the things that didn't go right, and how can we actually make them better next time. Hopefully we won't come across these kind of disasters, these kind of situations again, but knowing how the world is, we will be, I personally, as a conservator, will be very, very happy to be in the front line, and I'm sure Claire as well, when this kind of crisis happen.
That's great. I think a lot of people would love to. It's one of those projects that have so much to give, and you have so much to give and to return to people of Beirut. And this, I guess, concludes our talk. Thank you so much, Claire and Duygu, for being with us tonight. It's been a fantastic, detailed presentation. So like they said, if you have any further questions, perhaps you can email them over,
yes,
and then they can be answered later.
Sure.
But I would like to thank everyone, not just the speakers, but also the audience tonight on behalf of the Icon Ceramics and Glass Group. Thank you very much, and see you at the next event.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you everyone for listening.
Bye.
Bye.